Have you ever found yourself questioning the very purpose of your existence? Have you felt the crushing weight of a world that seems indifferent to your struggles and questions? If so, you're not alone. For centuries, philosophers and writers have grappled with this profound existential dilemma, seeking to understand why we live, suffer, and strive in a universe that offers no clear answers. Two of the most powerful voices to explore these questions are Fyodor Dostoevsky and Albert Camus, two men from different cultures, with vastly different philosophies, yet both fiercely wrestling with the absurdity of life. In this video, we will delve deep into the contrasting views of Dostoevsky and Camus, exploring their interpretations of the absurd, suffering, and the search for meaning in a seemingly meaningless world. Dostoevsky, the Russian literary giant, proposes that suffering, when faced with faith, becomes a path to redemption. His characters find a kind of grace and meaning through their struggles, suggesting that perhaps, despite life's cruelty, there is a way to transcend the absurd. On the other hand, Albert Camus, a French philosopher known for his existentialist ideas, argues that the absurdity of life cannot be escaped through faith or illusions. He challenges us to embrace life in its pure, raw absurdity, to rebel against the meaninglessness by living authentically and passionately. What if, in a world that feels increasingly complex, alienating, and uncertain, the answer doesn't lie in escaping the absurd, but rather in confronting it head-on? Can we, like Sisyphus in Camus' famous metaphor, find meaning in the struggle itself? Or like Dostoevsky's tortured souls, find redemption through belief and connection? The battle for meaning in a world that offers none is at the heart of human existence. And today, we're diving deep into how these two towering figures can guide us in the search for meaning. Stay tuned as we uncover not only the teachings of Dostoevsky and Camus, but also explore how their philosophies continue to shape our understanding of life, suffering, and ultimately, our search for purpose. But before we jump in, I want to remind you, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking videos like this. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us continue to create content, consider donating with a super thanks. Your support truly means the world to us and helps us bring these discussions to a wider audience. Let's get started on this philosophical journey into the absurd. Absurdity, as both a philosophical and literary theme, stands as one of the most profound challenges to the human condition. It speaks directly to the tension that arises when individuals are faced with the harsh reality that life seems devoid of any inherent meaning. This confrontation, the clash between humanity's deep-seated desire for purpose and the universe's seeming indifference to our existence, is a problem that has been at the forefront of existential thought for centuries. In a world that does not offer any clear reason for being, how are we to live authentically? How do we find meaning in a universe that refuses to give us any? At the heart of this existential dilemma lies the concept of absurdity, a term that is often used to describe the paradox we encounter when we realize that life is, in many ways, meaningless. This recognition can be both liberating and horrifying. On one hand, it can free us from the constraints of imposed meaning, offering the possibility of living without the need for justification. On the other hand, it can plunge us into a state of despair as we come to terms with the apparent futility of our existence. This tension, this struggle, is what philosophers like Fyodor Dostoevsky and Albert Camus grappled with in their work, offering two distinct approaches to the challenge of living with the absurd. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist who explored the depths of the human psyche, approached absurdity through the lens of suffering and faith. His characters often find themselves in direct confrontation with a world that seems both cruel and indifferent. In works like Notes from Underground and The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky lays bare the inner turmoil of individuals caught in a spiral of despair, questioning the meaning of their suffering. His characters, however, do not simply wallow in nihilism. Instead, they seek redemption through faith. For Dostoevsky, absurdity is not just a philosophical concept, but a lived reality, one that can be faced and transcended through spiritual awakening. In contrast to Dostoevsky, Albert Camus, the French philosopher and writer, approached absurdity with a more pragmatic and secular perspective. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus famously argued that life is inherently absurd because it lacks any ultimate purpose or meaning. The universe, indifferent to human existence, offers no explanation or salvation for our suffering. The realization of this absurdity, however, does not lead to despair for Camus. Instead, he calls for rebellion against the absurd, rather than seeking meaning from external sources or falling into nihilism. Camus advocates for a life lived fully and authentically, acknowledging the absurdity of existence while refusing to succumb to despair. His philosophy does not rely on the comfort of faith or the hope of redemption. Instead, it encourages us to embrace the absurd and live with it, confronting the void head-on. Dostoevsky and Camus thus present two radically different responses to the same existential problem. For Dostoevsky, the key to overcoming absurdity lies in the embrace of faith and the recognition that suffering can lead to spiritual growth. His characters often find solace in the belief that, despite the apparent meaninglessness of the world, there is a higher power that can imbue their lives with purpose. This search for meaning through faith is at the core of Dostoevsky's worldview. His characters, such as the underground man in Notes from Underground, experience a deep sense of isolation and alienation, but they are ultimately offered a path toward redemption through their relationship with God. In Dostoevsky's works, faith is not an escape from the absurd. It is a way to confront it and find meaning in a world that offers none. Camus, on the other hand, rejects the idea of divine meaning or any form of transcendent redemption. For him, the absurdity of existence is not something to be overcome, but something to be accepted and confronted. In his view, the search for meaning in the face of a meaningless universe is an exercise in futility. The absurd, as Camus sees it, is not something that can be rationalized or explained away. It is an inescapable part of the human experience. Rather than seeking comfort in religion or the hope of an afterlife, Camus suggests that we must live authentically by embracing the absurd. For Camus, the recognition of the absurd is a form of liberation. By acknowledging that life is meaningless, we are freed from the need to search for purpose and can instead focus on living fully in the present moment. The contrast between Dostoevsky's and Camus' views on the absurd is striking. Dostoevsky's characters often find peace in faith, using their belief in God as a means of navigating the absurd. For him, faith is the only true response to the chaos and suffering of the world. In works like The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky explores the role of suffering in spiritual growth, suggesting that through suffering, individuals can come to understand the nature of God and the purpose of their existence. In this view, faith provides both solace and a framework for making sense of the absurd world. Camus, by contrast, rejects the idea that faith can provide any real answers to the problem of absurdity. His view is rooted in the idea that the universe is indifferent to human suffering, and there is no ultimate meaning to be found in life. The absurd arises when we confront the gap between our desire for meaning and the silence of the universe. For Camus, the proper response to this recognition is not to seek refuge in faith or the hope of salvation, but to rebel against the absurd by embracing life in all its chaos and uncertainty. The act of rebellion, in Camus' view, is a way of asserting one's own autonomy in a world that refuses to provide any inherent meaning. Despite their differences, both Dostoevsky and Camus offer valuable insights into how individuals might confront the absurd. Dostoevsky's emphasis on faith and spiritual redemption speaks to those who find meaning in religion and see suffering as a means of drawing closer to God. His characters, though deeply flawed, ultimately find a sense of purpose through their relationship with the divine. In contrast, Camus' call for rebellion in the face of meaninglessness offers a secular response to the absurd. His philosophy encourages individuals to embrace life fully, even in the absence of any ultimate purpose or meaning. The absurd, for Camus, is not something to be feared or avoided. It is a fact of life to be lived with, without seeking any external justification. These contrasting perspectives, Dostoevsky's faith-based solution and Camus' secular rebellion, offer two distinct paths for dealing with the existential problem of absurdity. While Dostoevsky believes that the absurd can be overcome through faith, Camus argues that the only way to confront it is by accepting it and living authentically in the face of it. Both views, however, speak to the same fundamental truth, that the human quest for meaning is inextricably linked to the absurd nature of existence, whether through faith or rebellion. The challenge remains the same. How can we find meaning in a world that offers none? The philosophical dialogue between Dostoevsky and Camus offers profound insights into the human condition. Their respective approaches to the absurd reflect the broader existential struggle between seeking meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe and accepting the void with courage and authenticity. The tension between these two approaches, the search for meaning through faith and the embrace of the absurd through rebellion, continues to resonate today. In a world where many people feel increasingly disconnected and uncertain about their place in the universe, the ideas of Dostoevsky and Camus offer valuable guidance on how to confront the existential dilemmas that define the human experience. Dostoevsky's exploration of absurdity is rooted in a deeply human experience, the awareness of life's inherent meaninglessness. His works, particularly Notes from Underground, immerse us in the psychological turmoil of his characters, presenting their struggles not as mere intellectual exercises but as visceral, lived realities. In these works, the confrontation with absurdity is not an abstract philosophical debate, but a matter of personal survival, a matter of how to live in a world that offers no easy answers, no inherent purpose, and no moral or existential clarity. The Underground Man, the protagonist of Notes from Underground, is the embodiment of this struggle. He is a man torn between self-loathing, alienation, and the overwhelming realization that life does not offer any simple, redeeming meaning. This figure of the underground man serves as a symbol of the ultimate existential crisis. He is someone who feels profoundly disconnected not only from society but also from any higher meaning or sense of purpose. His isolation leads to a nihilistic worldview, one that sees life as ultimately futile. The underground man embodies the psychological and emotional toll that absurdity exacts. He constantly questions his own actions and the world around him, seeing everything through a lens of cynicism and distrust. This creates a kind of feedback loop of despair. The more he contemplates life's meaninglessness, the more he is consumed by feelings of worthlessness and self-loathing. Dostoevsky does not present absurdity as a mere intellectual issue. It is the root cause of suffering. His characters, like the underground man, do not simply grapple with the philosophical notion that life has no inherent meaning. They also experience the psychological anguish that accompanies this realization. The emotional toll of this knowledge is overwhelming, pushing his characters into a state of despair. It is the burden of meaninglessness that drives them toward nihilism, leading them to question the value of their own existence and the legitimacy of the world around them. However, where Dostoevsky differs from many other thinkers who tackle the absurd is in his belief that there can be resolution. Unlike thinkers who see the absurd as something to be grappled with indefinitely or accepted without hope of change, Dostoevsky presents the possibility of redemption through faith. His characters often move through their despair not by simply resigning themselves to the meaninglessness of the world, but by seeking meaning elsewhere, specifically in the realm of spiritual belief. For Dostoevsky, the answer to absurdity is not found in the rejection of existence or a surrender to nihilism, but in a kind of spiritual transcendence that can be achieved through faith in God. Faith, in Dostoevsky's worldview, is the means by which his characters can confront the absurd. This is most apparent in The Brothers Karamazov, where the question of faith and the meaning of suffering are central themes. The characters in the novel wrestle with the apparent cruelty of the world and the seeming indifference of God to human suffering. They are not offered easy answers or comforting assurances, but instead must navigate the terrifying and painful journey of reconciling the suffering of the world with their need for meaning and redemption. In Dostoevsky's view, it is through this struggle, this active, emotional, and intellectual confrontation with the absurd that individuals find the possibility of spiritual growth. For Dostoevsky, suffering is not something to be avoided or explained away. It is, paradoxically, the path to redemption. The underground man, for example, believes that he is beyond redemption, trapped in his own self-loathing and alienation. But his struggle, his continuous questioning of the world and his own place within it, becomes a form of spiritual exploration. In his despair, he seeks something beyond the limits of his own experience. He seeks the possibility of faith, of belief in something greater than himself. This search for meaning through suffering is, for Dostoevsky, not only a moral journey but a necessary one for spiritual awakening. In many of Dostoevsky's works, the character's search for meaning is interwoven with themes of connection to others. The isolation that the underground man feels is not just a psychological state, it is also a social one. He sees himself as disconnected from humanity, unable to connect with others in a meaningful way. This sense of alienation is a key element of the absurdity he experiences. However, Dostoevsky often presents the possibility of redemption through relationships with other people and, ultimately, with God. For him, the individual can find meaning not by retreating further into themselves or into nihilism, but by reaching out, by embracing connection and faith. This idea of redemption through connection and faith is particularly significant in Dostoevsky's exploration of human suffering. His characters are not just passive recipients of suffering, they actively seek to understand and overcome it. For Dostoevsky, the individual's relationship with God provides a means of understanding suffering's role in the human experience. Suffering is not meaningless, he suggests, but is part of a larger spiritual journey that can lead to redemption. One of the central themes in Dostoevsky's work is the idea of the leap of faith. In The Brothers Karamazov, the character of Ivan Karamazov expresses his deep skepticism about the possibility of a meaningful existence in a world full of suffering. He refuses to accept a God who allows innocent children to suffer. This rejection of a world that seems cruel and indifferent to human suffering mirrors the absurdity that Dostoevsky's characters often face. However, Dostoevsky's resolution to this conflict lies in the idea of a leap of faith, an act of trust in God and in the possibility of meaning. Even in the face of suffering, it is through this act of faith that his characters can transcend the absurdity of existence and find a deeper sense of purpose and meaning. What sets Dostoevsky apart from many other existential thinkers is his refusal to leave the absurd unresolved. For him, the recognition of the absurd is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a transformative journey. This journey is one that moves from despair to hope, from alienation to connection, and ultimately from meaninglessness to spiritual redemption. Dostoevsky's belief in the possibility of redemption through faith, connection, and the acceptance of suffering offers a deeply optimistic and profoundly human response to the problem of absurdity. In his exploration of the absurd, Dostoevsky provides a framework for understanding how human beings might confront and overcome the alienation and despair that arise from a meaningless world. His characters, while deeply flawed and often overwhelmed by the chaos and suffering of existence, offer a path forward, a path that leads not away from the absurd, but directly through it. This path, for Dostoevsky, is the path of faith, of human connection, and of the possibility of redemption. His view of absurdity is not one of nihilism or resignation, but one of hope and transformation. Through faith and suffering, individuals can find meaning in a world that seems devoid of it, creating their own sense of purpose and understanding in a universe that offers none. Albert Camus, with his deeply influential works such as The Myth of Sisyphus, offers a perspective on the absurd that contrasts sharply with Dostoevsky's religious and faith-based resolution. While Dostoevsky attempts to resolve the absurd through spiritual redemption, Camus takes a far more radical and secular stance. For Camus, the core of the absurd is not merely a philosophical puzzle or a theological dilemma, but a brutal and undeniable confrontation with the fundamental nature of existence itself. Life is meaningless, and the world offers no inherent answers. There is no ultimate purpose to our existence. and the universe does not provide any inherent meaning. The absurd arises when human beings, with their deep and unrelenting desire for purpose, confront a world that is silent in response. It is not a lack of purpose itself, but the relentless search for meaning in a world that stubbornly refuses to provide any that creates the absurd. At the heart of Camus' philosophy is the idea of rebellion, the refusal to surrender to despair in the face of meaninglessness. Unlike many who, upon confronting the absurd, succumb to nihilism or resign themselves to apathy, Camus believes that human beings have a choice to rebel against the absurd. This rebellion does not involve the creation of false hope, nor does it involve trying to impose meaning where none exists. Instead, it is about confronting the absurd directly, acknowledging it, and choosing to live fully in spite of it. Camus rejects the notion of an ultimate, transcendent meaning and instead argues that meaning must be constructed through our actions, relationships, and experiences. The concept of rebellion is central to Camus' entire philosophical project. To rebel, for Camus, is not simply to resist the despair that might arise from the recognition of life's meaninglessness. It is a proactive stance that requires the individual to assert their freedom and existence against the absurd. The human tendency to search for meaning, to seek answers, to find justification for suffering, is natural, but it is also futile. The universe does not care about our search. Yet, this very realization does not lead Camus to a nihilistic resignation. Instead, it leads him to advocate for living in defiance of the absurd, embracing the meaningless nature of existence, and refusing to escape it. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus introduces his metaphor of the absurd hero, a figure who embodies the core of his philosophy. Sisyphus, the king from Greek mythology who is condemned to push a boulder up a hill only for it to roll down again every time he reaches the top, becomes for Camus the perfect symbol of the absurd. Sisyphus's task is both endless and pointless. Yet, Camus argues, it is in the acceptance of the futility of his task that Sisyphus finds freedom. Sisyphus knows that the task is absurd and that he will never succeed in his endeavor. But it is in his rebellion against the meaninglessness of his labor that he asserts his humanity. Camus writes, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This notion is fundamental to Camus' thinking. The recognition of life's absurdity does not have to lead to despair or nihilism. It can lead instead to freedom. Camus' vision of the absurd hero is one of radical acceptance and living authentically in the face of a universe that offers no ultimate purpose. This living authentically requires a passionate engagement with life, an embrace of the present moment, and an acknowledgement that our existence is finite and without any transcendent justification. For Camus, living authentically does not mean resigning oneself to meaninglessness, but living with full awareness of the void, choosing to make our own meaning, and refusing to seek salvation in false hopes or external sources of meaning. It's about embracing the absurd without attempting to escape it. Living authentically, in Camus' view, is an act of defiance against the absurd. It is a form of rebellion, a conscious refusal to accept life as an empty, meaningless experience. But this rebellion is not about attempting to change the world or impose meaning on it. It is about acknowledging the meaninglessness of existence while still choosing to live passionately, with awareness and vigor. In fact, for Camus, the awareness of life's absurdity makes the act of living more meaningful in itself. Without the need to look for an ultimate purpose, we are freed to experience life fully, embracing it for what it is rather than what we hope it might be. This philosophy can be seen in the way Camus encourages people to live their daily lives. He does not suggest that the recognition of the absurd should lead to passivity or apathy. On the contrary, his absurd hero is one who remains deeply engaged with the world. Despite the absence of inherent meaning, it is the human condition to seek meaning, to search for answers, and to seek justice and truth. But Camus argues that these pursuits should be conducted with the full understanding that they are ultimately futile in the grand scheme of things. We might not find any transcendent justification for our actions, but that should not stop us from engaging with the world in a meaningful way, from pursuing what we care about with passion, and from finding joy in the act of living itself. For Camus, the experience of absurdity can be liberating. The lack of inherent meaning in the world means that we are not bound by any external, imposed purpose. Our freedom lies in the recognition that we are not beholden to any higher power or external system of meaning. We are free to create our own meaning in the world, even if that meaning is not ultimately universal or eternal. This freedom is an empowering concept, especially in a world where many people feel trapped by societal norms, religious dogma, or existential anxiety. In Camus' world, the only thing that truly matters is how we choose to live in the face of the absurd, how we choose to act, what we choose to care about, and how we choose to experience the brief moment that we have. Take, for instance, the experience of the everyday person facing existential uncertainty. We all confront moments of doubt, moments when the world seems absurd or overwhelming, when the search for meaning feels like an endless pursuit. Camus' message is not one of despair. Rather, it is one of defiance and empowerment. In these moments, we do not have to give up or fall into despair. Instead, we can affirm our existence by choosing to live fully, by embracing the absurd, and by finding freedom in this very act of rebellion. It's similar to how an individual who has faced the loss of a loved one might choose to honor that person's memory by living their life in a way that reflects the values and joy that person brought into the world, even knowing that the memory itself will eventually fade. This is rebellion not against the world, but against the absurdity of life itself, finding meaning through action and experience. Camus' philosophy also emphasizes the importance of community and solidarity in confronting the absurd. While his individualistic perspective on the absurd hero focuses on personal rebellion, Camus was also deeply aware of the ways in which humans find meaning through collective action and shared experience. The absurd hero does not live in isolation, but actively participates in the world, forging connections with others and contributing to society. It is through these relationships, through shared struggles and joys, that we find a way to live meaningfully, even in a world that offers no ultimate purpose. In the context of modern society, Camus' perspective on the absurd offers a compelling critique of many of the illusions we live by, whether it is the constant pursuit of material wealth, the need for external validation, or the search for transcendent religious or philosophical truths. Camus challenges us to let go of these false hopes and embrace the freedom of accepting the absurd. In a world where meaning is often constructed from fleeting and superficial sources, Camus calls for a return to authenticity, a return to living for the sake of living, experiencing the world and ourselves without the need for an ultimate answer. Camus' philosophy does not offer comfort in the conventional sense, but it offers something perhaps more profound: the freedom to live fully in the face of a world that offers no clear meaning. His absurd hero, the person who embraces the absurd, is not a person who is resigned to life's futility, but someone who rebels against it by living with passion and authenticity, without the need for external validation or false hope. In this way, Camus' perspective on the absurd is not just a call to recognize the meaninglessness of the world, but also an invitation to live in a way that affirms our existence and our freedom in the midst of it. The contrasting views of Fyodor Dostoevsky and Albert Camus on the absurd center around one fundamental divide: the question of whether meaning can be found through faith or if it must be embraced through rebellion and the acceptance of life's inherent meaninglessness. These two thinkers, though both deeply concerned with the struggle of the human soul in the face of an indifferent universe, arrive at vastly different solutions to the problem of absurdity. Dostoevsky, influenced by a deeply religious worldview, finds meaning through faith, while Camus, a secular humanist, rejects any transcendental source of meaning and instead advocates for a rebellion against the absurdity of life. At the heart of Dostoevsky's approach is the belief that suffering, while devastating, can serve as a pathway to spiritual growth. He sees suffering not as something to be avoided or ignored, but as a necessary crucible through which individuals can find meaning. For Dostoevsky, life's absurdity is only truly confronted when the individual grapples with the harsh realities of existence and seeks solace in a higher power. His characters, particularly those in works like Notes from Underground and The Brothers Karamazov, often wrestle with existential despair, alienation, and the sense that life has no ultimate purpose. However, in the midst of this darkness, many of Dostoevsky's characters turn to faith in God, and it is through this faith that they find a semblance of meaning in the face of the absurd. Dostoevsky's belief in faith as a solution to the absurd stems from his conviction that human beings are not mere creatures of reason, but also spiritual beings capable of transcending their earthly suffering. His characters often express a profound awareness of the human condition, recognizing the cruelty and meaninglessness of existence. But they also find in their relationship with God a way to transcend these feelings of despair. Through faith, Dostoevsky believes, individuals are able to confront the absurdity of life without being consumed by it. Faith provides a foundation for meaning, a sense of purpose in the midst of suffering, and a connection to something greater than oneself. For Dostoevsky, this process of turning to God is not simply a passive retreat from the absurd. It is an active choice that requires courage and introspection. It involves confronting the harsh realities of life, head-on acknowledging the suffering and the meaninglessness of existence, but then finding a way to move beyond that despair by embracing faith. In works like The Brothers Karamazov, the character of Ivan Karamazov embodies the struggle with this very question. Ivan's intense questioning of God's role in human suffering represents the core of Dostoevsky's exploration of the absurd. Ivan cannot reconcile the pain of innocent children with the idea of a benevolent, omnipotent God, and yet his journey toward faith is a central part of his character's arc. Ivan's ultimate resolution lies in the acceptance of suffering as a form of spiritual growth, something that connects him to the divine and, ultimately, gives him the strength to endure the absurdity of existence. Camus, however, takes a radically different approach to the problem of absurdity. He rejects the idea of divine intervention or a transcendent source of meaning, arguing instead that the search for meaning in a meaningless world is futile. For Camus, the confrontation with the absurd is not something that can be solved by faith or a higher power. The absurd, in his view, arises from the inherent conflict between the human desire for meaning and the universe's utter indifference to our existence. Unlike Dostoevsky, who believes that meaning can be found through faith, Camus argues that meaning is something that must be created by the individual, even in the face of overwhelming meaninglessness. In his seminal work The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus introduces the idea of the absurd hero, a figure who confronts the absurdity of existence not with despair or resignation but with defiance. The myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to eternally push a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down each time, becomes for Camus a powerful symbol of the human struggle against the absurd. Sisyphus's task is inherently pointless, and yet, Camus argues, it is in the recognition of this futility that Sisyphus finds freedom. For Camus, the key to confronting the absurd is to acknowledge it fully and then to live with it, without attempting to escape or find false meaning. The rebellion, in this sense, is not an attempt to deny the absurd but an acceptance of it, an act of defiance against the idea that life's meaninglessness must lead to despair. Camus' philosophy does not advocate for any form of transcendence or escape from the absurd. Instead, it encourages individuals to live fully in the present, fully aware of the futility of life's pursuits. In the face of an indifferent universe, the absurd hero does not turn to faith or a higher power for solace. Instead, they choose to embrace life as it is, in all its absurdity. For Camus, the act of rebellion is not about seeking meaning in a higher realm or transcendent reality. It is about affirming life in the here and now, accepting the absurdity of existence, and choosing to live passionately and authentically despite it. One of the key differences between Dostoevsky's and Camus' views on the absurd lies in their contrasting approaches to the role of faith. Dostoevsky believes that faith is essential to overcoming the absurd, while Camus insists that faith is a form of escape, a denial of the absurd. For Dostoevsky, faith in God provides a way to transcend the meaninglessness of existence, offering a sense of purpose and connection to a higher reality. For Camus, however, Faith is a form of self-deception. It provides false hope in a world that offers no answers, and it denies the true nature of the absurd by offering a transcendent source of meaning that is ultimately illusory. This philosophical divide between Dostoevsky and Camus highlights a fundamental tension in the human response to the absurd, whether to seek meaning in a higher power or to confront meaninglessness head-on. Without illusions, Dostoevsky's religious framework offers a path to redemption through faith, while Camus' secular framework offers a path to authenticity through rebellion. For Dostoevsky, the answer to the absurd is found in embracing the divine, while for Camus, the answer is found in embracing the absurd and living fully in the face of it. Both thinkers, however, are united in their recognition that the human condition is defined by the search for meaning in a world that offers none. This divergence in their views on the absurd also reflects their broader philosophical outlooks. Dostoevsky's religious framework is rooted in the belief that human beings are not only rational creatures, but also spiritual ones, capable of transcending their earthly suffering through faith. His view of the absurd is ultimately one of hope, offering the possibility of redemption and spiritual growth. Camus, by contrast, views human beings as fundamentally rational and secular, and his view of the absurd is rooted in the recognition that life is without inherent meaning. His response to the absurd is one of defiance, living authentically and fully in the face of meaninglessness. Despite these differences, both Dostoevsky and Camus offer powerful insights into the human experience of absurdity. Dostoevsky's faith-based approach provides a path to transcendence through spiritual connection, while Camus' secular rebellion provides a path to authenticity through acceptance of the absurd. The tension between these two approaches, the search for meaning through faith and the rebellion against meaninglessness, is one of the central themes of existential philosophy, and it remains a crucial question in the modern world. Whether we seek meaning in the divine or face the void without illusions, the challenge remains the same. How do we live authentically in a world that offers no inherent purpose? Dostoevsky and Camus provide two distinct answers to this question, both of which continue to resonate with individuals grappling with the absurdity of existence. The legacy of Fyodor Dostoevsky and Albert Camus, despite their fundamentally different approaches to understanding the absurd, has left a profound and lasting impact on modern thought, culture, and the way we approach existential questions in contemporary society. Both thinkers, through their exploration of human suffering, meaning, and the search for purpose, have shaped philosophical discourse and offered distinct paths for dealing with the inherent meaninglessness of life. Dostoevsky's emphasis on the relationship between suffering and faith continues to resonate in an increasingly secular world, while Camus' focus on rebellion against the absurd has become a cornerstone of existentialist thought and modern nihilism. Dostoevsky's legacy is particularly significant in how it continues to inform the way we grapple with crises of meaning in our lives. His work highlights the intense psychological and emotional turmoil of his characters as they confront the absurdity of existence and the possibility of finding meaning in a seemingly indifferent world. His exploration of faith as a response to suffering, seeing faith as a means of transcending the meaninglessness of life, has profound implications in the modern age, particularly for individuals seeking solace or understanding in a time where traditional religious beliefs and institutions are increasingly questioned or rejected. Dostoevsky's characters often wrestle with despair, alienation, and the seeming futility of existence. Yet many ultimately find a sense of purpose through their belief in a higher power. This spiritual framework allows them to face life's absurdities and suffering with renewed strength, and it suggests that human beings can overcome existential crisis through a relationship with God. In a world that is rapidly becoming more secular, Dostoevsky's emphasis on the power of faith to confront the absurd remains deeply relevant. The increasing prevalence of existential crises, fueled by growing uncertainty in both personal lives and the larger socio-political world, points to the ongoing need for meaning-making. In such a context, Dostoevsky's works, especially Notes from Underground and The Brothers Karamazov, continue to provide essential insights into how human beings can confront life's inevitable suffering while still striving for meaning. Through suffering, Dostoevsky suggests people can achieve spiritual growth, turning the painful recognition of the absurd into an opportunity for redemption. While Dostoevsky's focus on faith and suffering has remained a guiding principle for many seeking answers to the absurd, Albert Camus' legacy in the modern world is perhaps even more pronounced, particularly in light of the rise of existentialist thought and the cultural shift towards secularism. Camus' philosophy, centered around the confrontation with meaninglessness and the rebellion against it, speaks directly to the existential crises faced by individuals in the contemporary world, who often feel overwhelmed by the lack of inherent meaning in life. Camus' focus on rebellion is a powerful counterpoint to Dostoevsky's religious solution. Instead of turning to faith or a higher power, Camus advocates for the individual's defiance against the absurd, emphasizing the importance of living authentically and embracing life without the illusion of meaning. Camus' existentialism has become one of the central intellectual pillars for understanding the absurd in the modern era. His works, particularly The Myth of Sisyphus, present a radical alternative to traditional responses to the absurd, while Dostoevsky emphasizes faith as a solution to life's meaninglessness. Camus suggests that the absurd should not be overcome but rather embraced. For Camus, to confront the absurd is not to seek answers from external sources such as religion, but to recognize that life is fundamentally meaningless and yet still find the strength to live fully, with passion and authenticity. This rebellious stance against meaninglessness encourages individuals to live as absurd heroes, engaging fully with life without falling into despair or nihilism. The realization that life lacks inherent purpose can, paradoxically, free people from the burden of searching for meaning and instead allow them to live more freely, creating their own meaning through action, experience, and relationships. In the context of modern existential crises, particularly in an era where questions of purpose and meaning are so prevalent, Camus' perspective offers a form of resistance. In a time when religious beliefs no longer provide the same sense of meaning for many people, and when nihilism threatens to overwhelm individuals with despair, Camus' rebellious stance provides a critical framework for living authentically without surrendering to the despair that often accompanies the recognition of life's absurdity. This view aligns closely with the contemporary experience of navigating a world that feels increasingly fragmented and uncertain. People are constantly confronted with the reality that their existence is fleeting, and the world in which they live offers no clear answers to their questions of purpose. Camus' emphasis on rebellion in the face of absurdity speaks powerfully to individuals facing these existential challenges. By rejecting false hopes and illusions, Camus encourages individuals to confront their deepest fears and uncertainties head-on. This confrontation with the absurd is not an easy one, but it is empowering because it demands authenticity and engagement with life in a way that transcends the need for external meaning. This focus on living in the moment and finding meaning in the act of living itself has become an essential element of modern existentialist thought, and it continues to resonate with people today. Both Dostoevsky and Camus have left an indelible mark on literature, philosophy, and psychology. Dostoevsky's exploration of the interplay between suffering, faith, and redemption continues to shape how we think about human suffering and the potential for spiritual growth. His works provide a roadmap for how people can confront life's absurdities through the lens of faith, offering solace and hope to those who find themselves struggling with existential despair. In contrast, Camus' insistence on rebellion and the creation of meaning through the acceptance of the absurd challenges individuals to live fully, authentically, and independently of external justifications. His work speaks to the personal empowerment that comes with accepting life's fundamental lack of meaning while still choosing to live passionately and purposefully. Both thinkers, through their respective approaches to the absurd, provide individuals with tools for navigating the existential challenges of our time. Dostoevsky offers a path of redemption through faith, while Camus offers a path of resistance through rebellion. Their ideas continue to inform contemporary discussions on meaning, faith, and the human condition, especially in a world where uncertainty, alienation, and crisis of meaning are pervasive. Dostoevsky's works provide a theological framework for understanding suffering and finding hope, while Camus' works offer a secular philosophy for engaging with life's fundamental absurdity. Together, their contributions serve as vital touchstones for anyone struggling with the overwhelming questions of life's purpose in an increasingly complex and uncertain world. The cultural and intellectual climate of the modern world, characterized by growing secularism, increasing skepticism toward traditional religious institutions, and the rise of existentialist thought, has made both Dostoevsky's and Camus' perspectives more relevant than ever. Today, many individuals find themselves asking the same questions that Dostoevsky and Camus grappled with in their work. What is the meaning of life? How should we confront the suffering and absurdity that pervade human existence? Should we look to faith? Or should we embrace the absurd and live authentically in its face? These are the same questions that continue to shape our philosophical, cultural, and personal lives as we face an increasingly uncertain future, marked by technological advancements, societal shifts, and global crises. The works of Dostoevsky and Camus provide us with the tools to navigate the challenges of the modern world, whether one turns to faith, as Dostoevsky suggests, or embraces rebellion, as Camus advocates. Their ideas offer powerful frameworks for making sense of an absurd world and finding meaning in the process. The legacy of the absurd, as articulated by both Dostoevsky and Camus, will continue to guide those who seek to understand and confront the complexities of existence in an ever-changing world. Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus is a cornerstone of existentialist philosophy, encapsulating his perspective on the absurd and humanity's struggle to find meaning in a world that offers none. The work introduces the concept of the absurd, a fundamental clash between human beings' inherent search for meaning and a universe that provides no answers. Through the retelling of the Greek myth of Sisyphus, Camus provides a potent metaphor for the absurd human condition, illustrating how individuals can confront meaninglessness not by resignation, but through a rebellious affirmation of life itself. In the myth, Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, is condemned by the gods to an eternal and pointless task, rolling a massive boulder up a mountain, only for it to roll back down as soon as he nears the top. This ceaseless repetition renders his effort utterly futile, a seemingly endless cycle of exertion without any hope of accomplishment or escape. For Camus, this endless struggle becomes a powerful allegory for the human experience in an indifferent, uncaring universe. Camus' reading of the myth hinges on the idea that Sisyphus, in his acceptance of the absurdity of his task, becomes the absurd hero par excellence. The gods, in their punishment, thought they were condemning Sisyphus to eternal despair. However, Camus argues that by recognizing the futility of his condition without resorting to delusion or false hope, Sisyphus achieves a kind of freedom that transcends his punishment. The absurd hero, in this sense, is not one who denies the absurd or attempts to escape it, but one who embraces it fully and lives in defiance of it. This rebellion against meaninglessness is not passive resignation, but rather an active choice to find value in life even in the face of its inherent futility. For Camus, the true absurdity of life does not lie in the lack of meaning itself, but in the human tendency to search for meaning in a universe that does not provide it. The recognition of this absurdity, the awareness that life is ultimately meaningless and that death is inevitable, is a crushing realization for many. It can lead to despair, resignation, and a retreat into false hopes, whether religious, ideological, or escapist. Camus argues, however, that while the absurdity of existence can indeed seem overwhelming, it does not have to lead to despair. Instead, individuals can rebel against the absurd by living authentically, embracing life's uncertainties and challenges without relying on illusory sources of meaning. This act of rebellion, central to Camus' philosophy, is about refusing to give in to nihilism or apathy. It's about affirming life, despite its inherent meaninglessness. Sisyphus, in his eternal task, embodies this rebellion. Camus writes, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, The image of Sisyphus smiling as he pushes the boulder uphill might seem paradoxical, yet it captures the essence of Camus' philosophy. It is not the achievement of the goal that matters, but the continuous effort itself. Sisyphus, by accepting his fate without hope of redemption, demonstrates the power of human resilience. His rebellion is not against the task itself, but against the despair that might otherwise consume him. The concept of the absurd hero that Camus introduces through Sisyphus challenges conventional notions of human striving. In traditional narratives, heroes achieve greatness by overcoming obstacles, reaching their goals, or finding some ultimate meaning or redemption. But in the world of the absurd, such victories are impossible. The absurd hero, according to Camus, is someone who does not seek to overcome the absurd but embraces it and lives in full awareness of its reality, rather than seeking refuge in false hopes. The absurd hero affirms life, even in its most pointless and transient forms. In this sense, the absurd hero is not one who rejects life, but rather one who chooses to live it fully, in the face of its impermanence and futility. Sisyphus, in his endless task, represents the human condition in a world that offers no inherent purpose. Yet, his story is not one of complete tragedy. The acceptance of the absurd does not entail resignation, but an acknowledgement that, despite the lack of ultimate meaning, life still holds value. Camus encourages individuals to look beyond the futility of their efforts and to embrace the experience of living itself. Life, with all its struggles, contradictions, and suffering, is worth living because it is all we have. The key to Camus' philosophy is not to abandon the search for meaning, but to shift the focus away from external, illusory sources of meaning toward the affirmation of life itself. This shift in perspective is exemplified in the modern existential experience, particularly in a world increasingly characterized by uncertainty and complexity. Many people, confronted with the seeming absurdity of life, fall into despair, struggling to find purpose or meaning. Camus, through the figure of Sisyphus, offers an alternative. Rather than succumbing to nihilism, individuals can rebel against the absurd by embracing their situation and living authentically. This rebellion is not a rejection of reality, but an acceptance of it. Camus' absurd hero does not seek to escape from the world, but fully engages with it, creating meaning in the process of living, rather than expecting it to be handed down from external sources. In contemporary society, this rebellion against the absurd resonates with many people who feel lost or disconnected from traditional sources of meaning, such as religion or societal norms. The modern world, with its constant technological advancements, cultural shifts, and existential questions, can feel overwhelming. For many, the search for meaning can seem like an endless struggle, much like Sisyphus's task. Yet, Camus' philosophy offers a way forward, the acceptance of life's absurdity without falling into despair. By confronting the meaninglessness of existence directly and choosing to live authentically, individuals can affirm their own existence and find value in the experience of living itself. This philosophical stance is not easy to adopt. The absurd, by definition, challenges deeply ingrained human desires for purpose and order. To confront the absurd and rebel against it requires a deep psychological and emotional fortitude. It means rejecting illusions of transcendent meaning or purpose and instead finding meaning in the here and now, in the act of living itself. For Sisyphus, this means continuing to push the boulder, knowing that it will inevitably roll back down, but finding satisfaction in the effort itself. For the modern individual, it might mean embracing life's uncertainties, recognizing the lack of inherent meaning, and still choosing to engage with the world in an authentic and passionate way. Camus' message is not one of despair, but of liberation. The absurd hero is not bound by the need for a grand purpose. Instead, they are liberated by the recognition that life does not owe them meaning. In this freedom, they are able to live more fully and intensely, finding joy and meaning in the very process of living. This rebellion against the absurd is not an escape from reality, but a full embrace of it. Sisyphus, in his eternal struggle, demonstrates the strength of the human spirit and the power of rebellion against meaninglessness. Through his acceptance of the absurd, Sisyphus becomes a symbol of defiance, not against the world, but against the despair that would otherwise strip life of its value. In this way, Camus' philosophy offers an enduring and powerful perspective on how to live in a world that offers no ultimate answers. By embracing the absurd, living authentically, and rejecting false hopes, individuals can affirm their own existence and find meaning in the process of living. The myth of Sisyphus, as interpreted by Camus, thus becomes not a story of eternal frustration, but a celebration of the resilience of the human spirit. Dostoevsky's approach to suffering is deeply intertwined with his exploration of faith, particularly in how suffering can be both a transformative and redemptive experience. While Camus' philosophy centers on rebellion and acceptance of life's absurdity without recourse to any higher meaning, Dostoevsky offers a starkly different perspective, one that hinges on the idea that suffering is not merely an unfortunate byproduct of existence, but a necessary and transformative force capable of leading individuals towards spiritual redemption. In Dostoevsky's worldview, suffering is not something to be avoided or explained away. It is, instead, a crucible in which the human spirit can be tested and ultimately forged into something transcendent. At the heart of Dostoevsky's philosophy of suffering is the belief that through suffering, individuals can find their way to faith. His characters often undergo intense psychological and emotional turmoil, grappling with existential despair and feelings of alienation. The underground man from Notes from Underground exemplifies this inner struggle, experiencing a deep sense of self-loathing and disillusionment with both society and himself. Yet, despite the overwhelming despair he faces, Dostoevsky's work suggests that it is through suffering, introspection, and spiritual reflection that one can begin to find meaning in life. His characters may be immersed in a state of existential crisis, but it is in confronting this crisis, often through suffering, that they come to understand something deeper about themselves and the world. Dostoevsky's emphasis on suffering is especially prominent in his novel, The Brothers Karamazov, where the characters wrestle with fundamental questions of faith, morality, free will, and the meaning of suffering. In this work, Dostoevsky explores the problem of theodicy, the question of why a benevolent and omnipotent God allows suffering to exist in the world. This question is central to the novel, as the character Ivan Karamazov, in particular, struggles with the apparent injustice of a world that allows innocent people, especially children, to suffer. Ivan famously rejects the idea of a God who permits such suffering, stating that he cannot reconcile the existence of a compassionate God with the cruelty he sees in the world. In contrast to Ivan's rejection of God, Dostoevsky presents the character of Alyosha Karamazov, who embodies the potential for faith and redemption through suffering. Alyosha is deeply religious and believes that through his suffering, he can come to a greater understanding of life and the divine. In The Brothers Karamazov, suffering is not portrayed as a meaningless or arbitrary force, but as a pathway through which one can attain a greater understanding of God's will and presence in the world. Through his suffering and his deep connection to others, Alyosha is able to find meaning in a world that seems filled with suffering and injustice. Dostoevsky's view of suffering is rooted in his belief that human beings are not merely rational creatures seeking to understand the world through logic and reason, but are also spiritual beings capable of transcending their earthly condition. Suffering, for Dostoevsky, becomes a means of spiritual purification. It is through enduring hardship, pain, and despair that individuals can come to realize their dependence on God and develop a deeper sense of humility, compassion, and empathy. In this sense, suffering is not seen as a senseless or purely negative experience. Instead, it becomes a vehicle for personal and spiritual growth. This theme of redemption through suffering is central to many of Dostoevsky's works. In Crime and Punishment, the protagonist Raskolnikov's journey is marked by intense suffering as he grapples with guilt and moral conflict after committing murder. His torment serves as a path towards spiritual awakening, as he gradually comes to realize the depth of his crime and the importance of repentance and moral responsibility. Ultimately, It is through suffering and his eventual confession that Raskolnikov finds a path to redemption, though not without a deep internal struggle. For Dostoevsky, Raskolnikov's suffering is not something that should be avoided or mitigated. It is an essential part of his moral and spiritual development. What distinguishes Dostoevsky's view of suffering from that of Camus is the belief that suffering can have a positive, redemptive role in the human experience, whereas Camus focuses on rebellion in the face of life's absurdity, encouraging individuals to embrace the meaninglessness of existence without seeking any transcendent purpose. Dostoevsky argues that suffering is a means by which individuals can connect with the divine and find a higher meaning. Through suffering, individuals can transcend the absurdity of existence and come to understand the world in a more profound, spiritually meaningful way. For Dostoevsky, suffering is not a source of despair, but rather an opportunity for personal transformation and spiritual awakening. Dostoevsky's exploration of suffering also highlights the importance of human connection in the process of redemption. His characters, despite their isolation and alienation, often find solace and meaning in their relationships with others. This is evident in The Brothers Karamazov, where Alyosha's compassion for others, as well as his willingness to share in their suffering, helps him come to a deeper understanding of God's love and the meaning of life. In Dostoevsky's worldview, human connection and empathy are essential components of the redemptive process. Suffering is not something to be endured alone. It is through our relationships with others that we are able to find healing and meaning. This emphasis on human connection in the face of suffering is particularly relevant in contemporary society, where many individuals experience profound feelings of isolation, alienation, and loneliness, in a world that increasingly prioritizes individualism and self-reliance. Dostoevsky's message reminds us that it is through our relationships with others, through our capacity for love, compassion, and shared suffering that we are able to transcend the isolation and meaninglessness that so often characterize the human condition. Suffering, in this sense, becomes a means of connecting with others on a deeper level, allowing individuals to find solidarity and purpose in their shared experiences. In The Idiot, another of Dostoevsky's works, the character of Prince Mishkin embodies the idea of redemption through suffering and faith. Mishkin, often seen as a Christ-like figure, is depicted as someone who suffers deeply throughout the novel but remains steadfast in his belief in the goodness of humanity and the potential for spiritual redemption. His suffering is both personal and external. He faces betrayal, isolation, and a lack of understanding from those around him, but his unwavering faith allows him to see beyond the immediate suffering and recognize the deeper potential for healing and redemption in the world. Ultimately, Dostoevsky's view of suffering is one that offers hope and redemption, while Camus focuses on the rebellion against meaninglessness. Dostoevsky sees suffering as a necessary and transformative experience that can lead to spiritual growth and redemption. His characters may initially struggle with the crushing weight of existential despair, but through their relationship with God, their introspection, and their connection to others, they ultimately find meaning and purpose. For Dostoevsky, the answer to the absurd is not to deny it or accept it passively, but to confront it through suffering, faith, and human connection. In this way, suffering becomes not a source of despair, but a means of finding deeper meaning in a world that might otherwise seem indifferent or meaningless. Dostoevsky's exploration of suffering and redemption continues to resonate in contemporary discussions of existentialism, theology, and psychology. His view that suffering can be a redemptive force, capable of leading individuals to spiritual awakening and greater compassion, offers a deeply human response to the question of how to find meaning in an indifferent world. Whether one approaches life's challenges through faith, through the lens of suffering, or through rebellion, Dostoevsky's works remind us that the search for meaning is a deeply personal and transformative journey. The exploration of absurdity through the works of Fyodor Dostoevsky and Albert Camus offers two fundamentally different but equally profound pathways for addressing the existential question of meaning in a world that often seems indifferent, if not hostile, to our search for purpose. Dostoevsky, deeply grounded in religious faith, believes that suffering can lead to redemption and that meaning can be found through a relationship with God. On the other hand, Camus, with his emphasis on rebellion and existential defiance, argues that the absurdity of life must be confronted head-on, not through the solace of faith, but through an embrace of the present, a living of life authentically and passionately without relying on any higher meaning. While their conclusions are diametrically opposed, both thinkers provide invaluable frameworks for understanding how individuals can navigate the complex, often contradictory terrain of life, especially when confronted with its inevitable meaninglessness. Dostoevsky's exploration of absurdity, particularly through the experiences of his characters, speaks to the power of faith and the transformative potential of suffering. His protagonist characters like the underground man in Notes from Underground, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, and Alyosha and the brothers Karamazov are often torn between deep existential despair and the possibility of redemption through belief. Dostoevsky does not shy away from portraying the brutal realities of suffering, injustice, and alienation. His characters are often in the throes of emotional and intellectual turmoil, questioning the meaning of their existence in a world that seems indifferent to their struggles. Yet, through this very suffering, Dostoevsky's characters find moments of spiritual awakening. Faith, for Dostoevsky, is not a form of escapism but a means of transcending the absurd, a way to move beyond the sense of futility that can overwhelm the human spirit. Dostoevsky's focus on faith as the path toward redemption places him at odds with thinkers like Camus, who would reject any religious solution to the absurd. Camus, in his work The Myth of Sisyphus, argues that the human search for meaning is inherently futile. The universe, in Camus' view, offers no answers, no higher purpose, and no ultimate justification for our existence. For Camus, the recognition of this absurdity is not an invitation to despair, but rather an opportunity for rebellion. His absurd hero, epitomized in the figure of Sisyphus, does not seek meaning beyond the confines of the human experience, but chooses instead to confront the meaninglessness of life directly, living authentically in the face of it. Camus' rebellion is not about rejecting life but about embracing it fully, with all its uncertainties and contradictions, without the need for external validation or transcendental meaning. Both Dostoevsky and Camus, despite their opposing stances, are concerned with the same central issue: how to live meaningfully in a world that seems to offer no inherent meaning. In a world that often feels chaotic, indifferent, and even hostile, the human quest for meaning remains a constant and deeply personal struggle. This struggle becomes even more pronounced in the modern age, as rapid technological advancements, societal changes, and existential uncertainty place increasing pressure on individuals to find or create meaning. In such a world, the insights of Dostoevsky and Camus remain highly relevant. Dostoevsky's work provides a pathway for those seeking to reconcile the meaninglessness of the world with the possibility of spiritual redemption. His belief that suffering can lead to spiritual growth and that faith in God can provide a framework for understanding the absurd offers a deeply human response to existential despair. His characters are often faced with overwhelming obstacles, whether it is the weight of moral guilt, the alienation from society, or the crushing awareness of life's impermanence. Yet, it is through their suffering that they often come to find a deeper understanding of their own humanity, a humanity that is connected to something greater than themselves. The power of faith, in Dostoevsky's view, is not just about finding comfort or solace in the face of suffering, but about transcending the meaninglessness of existence and finding a sense of purpose in a world that often seems devoid of it. On the other hand, Camus provides an alternative framework for confronting the absurd. His philosophy does not rely on faith, transcendence, or redemption. Instead, he advocates for a defiance of the absurd, a recognition of life's meaninglessness, and a rebellion against the despair that often accompanies such a realization. Camus' absurd hero finds meaning in the act of living itself, embracing life's uncertainties and contradictions without seeking to impose any higher meaning or purpose on it. This rebellion does not require resignation or nihilism, but rather an active engagement with life in all its complexity. The key, for Camus, is to live authentically in the present moment, accepting the absurdity of existence without attempting to escape from it. In doing so, individuals can find freedom and meaning through their own actions and choices. As we continue to grapple with the complexities of modern life, marked by rapid technological change, societal shifts, and increasing existential uncertainty, the search for meaning remains as urgent as ever. In a world that offers no easy answers and where traditional sources of meaning such as religion, community, or ideological certainty seem to be in decline, the insights provided by Dostoevsky and Camus offer us valuable tools for navigating the absurd. For those who continue to seek meaning through faith, Dostoevsky provides a rich and compelling vision of how suffering can lead to spiritual redemption. His works remind us that suffering, while painful, can also be a path to greater understanding, compassion, and ultimately, a deeper connection with the divine. Faith, for Dostoevsky, is not an escape from the absurd but a way to confront it head-on, to accept life's inherent suffering while finding a sense of meaning and purpose through a relationship with God. For those who reject the idea of transcendence, Camus offers a powerful vision of how to live authentically in a meaningless world. His insistence on rebellion against the absurd and active choice to live fully in the face of life's futility provides a compelling framework for those who find themselves adrift in an increasingly uncertain world. Camus' absurd hero teaches us that meaning does not come from external sources or from some grand cosmic order, but from the choices we make, the relationships we form, and the way we engage with life itself. The ongoing relevance of their ideas speaks to the universal human experience of grappling with existential uncertainty, whether through faith or rebellion. The search for meaning remains a deeply personal and existential journey. It is a journey that each individual must undertake in their own way, confronting the absurdity of life with courage, resilience, and, perhaps most importantly, authenticity. In a world that continues to offer no ultimate answers, Dostoevsky and Camus offer us two distinct but complementary paths for navigating the complexities of existence, whether through the redemptive power of faith or the rebellious affirmation of life itself. Their ideas continue to guide us in our ongoing search for purpose in an absurd world. So, after exploring the profound insights of Dostoevsky and Camus, what do we make of their philosophies? In a world that often seems indifferent to our existence, their ideas provide us with two very distinct paths for confronting the meaninglessness we sometimes face. Dostoevsky's emphasis on the transformative power of suffering through faith shows us that even in our darkest moments, there may be redemption, and that through our deepest despair, we can rise to something greater than ourselves. Faith, for him, is not just a way to escape the absurd, it's the key to transcending it. On the other hand, Camus' rebellious stance against the absurd forces us to acknowledge that life may not provide us with any ultimate meaning or purpose. But that doesn't mean we should succumb to nihilism. Instead, we must embrace the absurd, live authentically, and create meaning through our actions, our choices, and our engagement with the world. By confronting the absurd, rather than fleeing from it, we can experience freedom and joy in the very process of living. These two paths, one rooted in faith, the other in rebellion, offer us valuable ways of navigating the complexities of modern life. Whether you find solace in Dostoevsky's spiritual journey or inspiration in Camus' existential rebellion, both philosophies challenge us to confront the great questions of life in ways that are deeply personal and profoundly transformative. As we move forward, it's important to remember that the search for meaning in an absurd world is not a one-size-fits-all answer. Each of us will face our own battles with despair, alienation, and the question of purpose. But by drawing on the wisdom of figures like Dostoevsky and Camus, we can better equip ourselves to face the absurd with courage, authenticity, and resilience. If you found this discussion insightful, like this video, share it with others who might be struggling with similar existential questions, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into philosophy, literature, and the human condition. Your support allows us to continue creating thoughtful, impactful content, And if you'd like to take it a step further and support the channel even more, don't forget to donate with a super thanks. Your contribution helps us keep bringing these critical conversations to life and sharing them with a wider audience. Every bit of support goes a long way, and we truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us on this philosophical journey. Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and remember the quest for meaning, even in an absurd world, is a journey worth undertaking.